On a bright Saturday morning in Charleston, South Carolina, the energy of the weekend hung in the air. The city buzzed with excitement as people went about their business, enjoying the freedom that Saturdays bring. In the midst of it all, Malik Daniels, a 38-year-old entrepreneur, pulled into the lot of Coastal Luxury Motors. His heart thudded not from nerves, but from anticipation. This wasn't just any car he was looking to purchase, this was the culmination of years of relentless work and discipline. For Malik, this car, a sleek jet black sports model, symbolized his success, a reward for all the hard work he had put into building his career. He stepped out of his well-maintained Tesla, a vehicle that had served him loyally through the years. With a careful adjustment to his navy blazer and a smooth of his tie, he walked toward the dealership doors. As he crossed the threshold, the scent of fresh leather overwhelmed his senses, and he could feel the eyes of a few onlookers following his every move. He exuded confidence, his aura magnetic and professional, drawing people in without even trying. At the front desk, a woman named Sandra greeted him with a polite smile that seemed a little too rehearsed. Her sharp features and cool expression gave little away as her eyes briefly flicked over him, pausing as though assessing his worth. "Good morning," Malik said, his voice warm, his intentions clear. "I'm interested in the Jaguar F-Type outside. Could I speak to someone about running numbers?" Sandra tilted her head slightly, her smile stiffening, but her tone remained smooth, almost syrupy. "That model starts at $80,000, she replied, her voice soft but laced with an edge. "Are you sure you're ready to commit to something in that price range?" Her words hung in the air, tinged with doubt and subtle condescension. Malik paused, processing her statement. Was she questioning his ability to afford the car? He wasn't sure if he had heard her correctly, but he refused to let it throw him off. "I'm aware of the pricing," he replied, his voice steady. "I'd like to start the process, if that's all right." For a split second, Sandra's polite mask faltered. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the showroom. "Well," she said slowly, picking out the phone, though she made no attempt to dial it, "let's see if the car is still available." Malik stood there, waiting, but a shift in the atmosphere was undeniable. The vibe had changed. He wasn't a stranger to spaces where his presence felt unwelcome, but he hadn't expected that here. Not today. His heart still raced with excitement for the car, but his patience was beginning to wear thin. Sandra continued to stall, tapping her pen against the desk, her gaze fixed elsewhere. Something was off. Before he could voice his concern, Sandra's next words hit him like a cold gust of wind. "The issue is," she started, her voice slow and deliberate, "we don't want to waste anyone's time, yours or ours. This is a high-end dealership, and we have certain protocols." Her words were like a slap, each syllable dripping with implication. The insinuation was unmistakable. He had heard enough. Malik steadied himself, refusing to let the situation escalate. "Protocols?" he asked, his tone now measured. "I'm not sure I understand. I just want to run a credit check and see financing options, like any other customer." Sandra leaned forward, her expression sharpening. "I don't think this is the right dealership for you," she said, her voice turning icy. "Perhaps a more mid-range lot would suit your needs." Her words sliced through the air, leaving a trail of discomfort in their wake. Malik glanced around, taking in the murmurs that had begun to ripple through the showroom. His composure remained unshaken, but his mind raced. Was this really happening? Was he really being told he didn't belong here, in a city that prided itself on inclusivity and progress? In 2024? Before he could respond, a young man in a gray polo shirt stepped forward. His name tag read Ethan. Sandra, I can help him," Ethan said, his voice hesitant, but his intentions clear. "We don't usually turn customers away, do we?" Sandra's glare could have frozen water. "Ethan," she snapped, "this isn't your call to make. I'm following protocol." Ethan hesitated but didn't back down. "I just think—" "This is my dealership," Sandra interrupted, her voice cutting through the tension. "I make the decisions here." Malik raised a hand, signaling for Ethan to step back. "I appreciate your help," he said, addressing Ethan with a calm and firm tone. Then he turned back to Sandra, his patience now wearing thin. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to buy a car. If you're refusing to assist me, I'll have to escalate this." Sandra's smirk returned, colder than before. "Escalate to who?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think this is some sort of discrimination case?" She chuckled, the sound harsh and condescending. Good luck proving that. Malik's jaw clenched, but he refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. He reached for his phone, intending to document the situation, but before he could press record, a firm voice from across the room interrupted. Excuse me. A man in a tailored suit stepped forward. His silver-streaked hair and commanding presence made everyone in the room take notice. He exuded authority, and with one step, the entire atmosphere shifted. I couldn't help but overhear, he said, his voice smooth and deliberate. I'm Tony Busby, an attorney, and I'd like to know why this gentleman is being denied service. Sandra faltered, her confidence visibly shaken. This is a private matter, she replied quickly, her words hurried. It doesn't concern you. Tony ignored her, focusing on Malik. Would you mind explaining what's been happening here? His voice was calm, measured, the kind of demeanor that Malik needed right now. Malik took a deep breath and explained clearly, I came in to purchase a car. I've been repeatedly dismissed and told I don't belong here. Tony nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Sandra. Interesting, he said, his voice cool and cutting. Do you always determine who belongs here based on arbitrary assumptions? Sandra opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. As the tension in the room mounted, it was clear that this wasn't just about Malik's car, it was about something far bigger. The showroom had gone silent. Customers pretended to browse, others openly stared. The staff exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. Sandra's defiance started to crumble under Tony's gaze. I don't appreciate being accused of anything improper, she stammered, her voice shaky. This gentleman simply doesn't meet the requirements we have for financing. That's all. Tony raised an eyebrow. Financing requirements? That's an interesting claim, considering you haven't even run his credit check. He gestured toward the desk, where Sandra's hands hovered over the keyboard, but she made no move to touch it. So, tell me, what exactly are these requirements? His voice was calm, but the tension was thick, and all eyes in the room were on Sandra. Her face flushed red, yet she remained silent, gripping the edge of the desk. Malik, still standing tall, scanned the room. The shift was palpable, this wasn't just about one person anymore. Something bigger was unfolding. The eyes of those around them were no longer passive. They were invested. This moment wasn't just a brief blip, it was turning into a statement. Tony leaned in, his steps measured, his voice dropping an octave, yet it carried across the room like a whisper that demanded attention. Let me make this clear. Refusing to serve a customer based on assumptions or biases isn't just unethical. It's potentially illegal. If this gentleman chooses to pursue this legally, trust me, it won't end well for your dealership or your career. Sandra's lips trembled as she tried to hold on to some semblance of control. I don't need a lecture, she snapped, but the defiance was gone, replaced with something else. Something more fragile. This is a misunderstanding. Tony tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing with an almost amused skepticism. Is it? Then let's clear this up right now. Run the credit check. Process his request. Let's see if it's really about finances or if there's something else at play. The air crackled with tension. Ethan, the young employee who had been quietly watching, stepped forward. His voice was hesitant but firm. I can take over from here, he said, his gaze briefly meeting Malik's before he added, I'll help Mr. Daniels. Sandra glared at him, ready to protest, but before she could even open her mouth, a wave of murmurs rippled through the room. An older woman holding a leather handbag took a step forward, her voice cutting through the whispers like a knife. I've been coming here for years, she declared, her tone louder than before. I've never seen anyone treated like this. Another man, standing nearby, couldn't contain his disbelief. Exactly what's going on here? This is blatant. Sandra's authority was crumbling. She could feel it, the weight of the room's disapproval settling on her. But she wouldn't let go, not yet. Fine, she hissed, barely masking the resentment. Ethan, proceed. But don't say I didn't warn you. If this turns out to be a waste of time. Malik didn't respond. He simply handed his documents to Ethan, who wasted no time getting to work. The minutes that followed felt like hours. The results came in clear, undeniable. Malik's credit was impeccable. His finances solid. Ethan printed the report and handed it to Malik with an apologetic smile. Everything checks out. let's get you that car. Tony folded his arms, his gaze sharp as he turned to Sandra. Well, it seems your protocols were mistaken. Or should I say, non-existent. Sandra's face drained of color, and she looked as though the floor might swallow her whole. But before anyone could speak, Malik raised a hand, his voice calm, yet filled with weight. Hold on, he said, his words slicing through the tension, this isn't just about me. How many others have walked in here and been treated like this? How many left without someone like Mr. Busby to step in? The room fell into a suffocating silence. Malik's gaze swept across the group of customers. This isn't just about buying a car. It's about dignity. Respect. If we let moments like this slide, nothing changes. Just as his words began to settle, an unexpected voice from the back of the room broke through, its deep resonance adding another layer to the brewing storm. He's not the first. Heads turned toward the back, where a middle-aged man in a denim jacket stood. His arms were crossed tightly, his face weathered but steadfast, and his eyes burned with a fierce conviction. Sandra's face tightened with disdain. Excuse me, she snapped, her voice sharp but betraying a hint of uncertainty. The man stepped forward, his presence unwavering. I was here 2 months ago with my wife. We wanted to trade in her SUV for something newer. She's Latina, I'm white, and the sales rep kept talking to me like she wasn't even there. Like she didn't exist. His words landed like a blow. When we called them out, they claimed the vehicle we wanted wasn't in stock. But I saw it parked right outside. A collective gasp echoed through the room as murmurs spread like wildfire. Another voice, tentative but steady, rose from the crowd. A young black woman, her toddler perched in her arms, stepped forward. I came here last year, she said, her voice trembling with the weight of old wounds. I was looking at a sedan. I thought maybe it was just me. But the salesman kept steering me toward the cheapest options. I had the money. But they didn't even bother to show me the financing plans. Sandra's face turned ashen, her mask slipping entirely as more voices spoke up. Each story added another piece to a damning puzzle, one that painted a picture of a dealership culture that had long been steeped in quiet, systemic discrimination. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was a pattern. Malik stood tall, his gaze unwavering as he spoke. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he said, his voice steady yet powerful. These moments add up. They chip away at people. If we don't call them out, they become normal. Tony nodded, his expression resolute. This isn't just about bad behavior. It's systemic. And systemic problems need systemic solutions. Sandra, desperate to reclaim control, pushed back. Her voice rose in a panic. This is getting out of hand. We're a reputable business. We treat everyone fairly. But her words were lost in the rising tide of voices. From within her own ranks, a new voice emerged, shaky but determined. Ethan stepped forward, his face flushed but resolute. No, we don't, he said quietly. I've seen it. We have different standards for different people. And it's not right. The room erupted. Customers shouted questions. Employees whispered among themselves. Sandra struggled to keep her grip on the situation, but it was slipping away. Malik raised his hand again, the room quieting under his steady command. I didn't come here to cause chaos, he said, his voice calm but firm. But I also didn't come here to be dismissed. This isn't just about one dealership. It's about how we treat each other everywhere. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Sandra's composure had shattered, her face twisted with frustration as she slammed her hand on the counter. Enough of this, she barked. This is all being blown out of proportion. We run a professional operation here. Tony Busby stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. Professional? Refusing service without cause isn't professional. It's discriminatory. And the multiple testimonies we've just heard suggest a much deeper problem. Sandra's eyes darted to the office door, where the dealership's general manager, Douglas Harper, appeared, looking frazzled as he adjusted his tie and walked toward the group. What's going on here? He asked, his voice loud but strained, as though trying to project authority. Tony didn't waste a second. What's going on is that your dealership's reputation is on the line. And I think you need to hear this. Your dealership seems to have a problem with fair treatment, Malik's voice rang out, steady but cutting. He gestured toward the growing crowd of customers, their faces a blend of frustration and disbelief. This isn't just about one incident, he continued. It's about a pattern of bias and exclusion that your staff has been perpetuating for far too long. Douglas, visibly flustered, flushed a deep red. His lips twisted into a strained smile, though it faltered under the pressure of the moment. I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding, he said, his voice tight. Let's discuss this privately and resolve it amicably. But Malik didn't back down. His eyes locked onto Douglas's with unyielding resolve. No, he said, his voice calm but unwavering. This needs to be addressed here, in front of everyone. Too many people have suffered this kind of treatment. Sweeping it under the rug won't change a thing. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, the tension palpable. Douglas shifted uncomfortably, his forced smile fading. Mr. Daniels, he said, his voice strained, I assure you, we take these accusations seriously. If there's been any misconduct, we'll investigate and handle it appropriately. Malik's gaze never wavered. Good, he replied, his voice colder now, because I'm not going to let this slide. You don't get to dismiss people based on assumptions or prejudices. That ends here. The room was charged with energy, every eye on Douglas, waiting for him to respond. But before he could, Ethan stepped forward again. His voice, though hesitant, was steady with conviction. If I may, he began, addressing Douglas, I've worked here for 3 years. I've seen how we treat some customers differently. Steering them toward cheaper cars, refusing to run credit checks, making excuses. It's not right. And if we don't fix this, it's going to destroy our reputation. Douglas's face twisted in frustration, his patience running thin. You're out of line, son, he snapped. But Ethan stood firm. No, sir. I'm not out of line. I'm telling the truth. The room fell silent. The weight of Ethan's words hung in the air, a tension-filled pause stretching longer than it should have. Douglas's shoulders sagged, his authority deflating with the realization of the damage done. After a long, heavy silence, he turned to Sandra. We'll need to discuss your conduct further, he said stiffly. Then, addressing the room, he cleared his throat. To everyone here, I sincerely apologize for any mistreatment you've experienced. This is not the standard we want to uphold. Malik took a deep breath, his anger simmering but his resolve intact. Apologies are a start, he said, but actions speak louder. If you want to make this right, you need to change your practices. Starting now. Douglas nodded reluctantly, the fight gone from him. You're right, he muttered. We'll review our policies and retrain our staff to ensure fairness. The crowd remained skeptical, but there was a shift in the air. Something had changed. Sandra stood frozen behind the desk, her once imposing authority shattered. Ethan, though visibly relieved, wasn't sure what would come next. Even as the tension began to ease, one question lingered, would real change follow, or was this just empty damage control? Malik turned to the crowd, his voice calm but firm. Words are a start, he said, but we need to hold them accountable. This isn't just about one dealership. It's about changing how we approach situations like this everywhere. A ripple of agreement passed through the group. The older man who had spoken earlier nodded toward Malik. You've got my support, he said quietly. People like Sandra have gotten away with this for far too long. Sandra, still standing behind the desk, looked stunned. Her position of authority had evaporated, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Meanwhile, Douglas, fully aware of the damage to his dealership's reputation, addressed the crowd again. We'll begin a full review immediately. Any staff member found to have engaged in discriminatory practices will face consequences. Tony Busby, who had been standing silently by, finally stepped forward, his commanding presence drawing every eye in the room. I'll be following up to ensure this isn't just talk, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. And if anyone here feels they've been wronged, my office will be taking statements. Sandra glared at him, but said nothing. Malik, standing tall, extended his hand to Ethan. Thank you, he said sincerely, his voice full of gratitude. It takes courage to speak up, especially when it's not easy. Ethan shook his hand, his expression a mixture of relief and resolve. It's the right thing to do, he replied, his voice steady with the certainty of someone who had done what was necessary. As the crowd began to disperse, many customers approached Malik to thank him for standing up. The young black woman with the toddler smiled warmly. What you did today matters, she said, her voice full of appreciation. For all of us. Outside, as Malik walked toward his car, Tony caught up to him. You handled that with grace, Tony said, admiration in his voice. I've seen situations like this spiral out of control, but you stayed calm. Malik nodded, his voice steady. It's not just about me, he said. It's about showing that we don't have to accept this kind of treatment. We can demand better. Tony smiled, extending his card. If you ever need anything, let me know, he said. You've got an ally. Malik took the card, his gratitude flickering across his face. Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it. As he reached his Tesla, Malik glanced back at the dealership. It no longer felt like a place of rejection, it felt like the beginning of something bigger. The fight for equality hadn't ended, but today had been a step in the right direction. Moments like these, he thought, reminded us that progress doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing up, speaking out, and refusing to accept injustice. Malik's story isn't unique, but his determination to confront discrimination with dignity and resolve is an example for all of us. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on how we can challenge biases in our own lives. Speak up when you see injustice. Support those who are fighting for fairness. And remember, change begins with each of us.